Welcome to the Confident Care Academy YouTube and podcast. My name's Chrissy.
My name's Anna.
And we are going to talk today about boundaries in the workplace, especially if you're a new grad nurse or just new in general to healthcare.
Yeah, and lots of different boundaries. So we're excited to get into it, both with other coworkers, with the hospital in general, with providers, with yourself. Boundaries are huge, so we're excited to talk about it.
Honestly, I'm going to speak for Anna here because I know she said this earlier, like recovering people pleasers over here, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really common for nurses and people in healthcare in general. Like, you're the type of person who's like probably gone into this profession for some reason, as cheesy as it sounds. It's a helping profession. You want to help people. Yeah. You like it when people feel good. You like harmony. Like, you want to make people feel better. You want to make situations feel better. So it's really easy to give pieces of yourself away and not lay down boundaries in order to make that happen. And it's not healthy for you.
And at the end of the day, there's a reason that at most hospitals, not most, many, the average like half-life of a critical care nurse is like a year or two, and then they leave. So how can like you set up boundaries for yourself so that you are not like burning out so quickly? And I don't agree with like blaming the employee for burnout. I think that it's like systemic decisions that are made to exploit nurses. But there are some things that you can do to like make sure that you're not being disrespected in the way that you're being spoken to, and that you set up boundaries for yourself so that you are like taking care of yourself. So I think that there are some things that are like specifically self-care, but I think that there are also some systemic organizational things. So we'll talk about like all of that. I'm excited about it. It's so huge because like I had such a lack of this as a new grad.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to talk about like the nitty-gritty shift stuff first? Like boundaries as far as like your actual working?
I can think of like the first thing that comes to my head, and this is what I hear from new grads all the time, and I kind of forget about it because I'm so far out from it, but I just had someone tell me this the other day. People try to take advantage of you with like getting you to pick up shifts. So like not just overtime, but like shift switches. Like they know it'll be easier to peer pressure you into a switch that's not good for you.
Because you want people to like you. You're new to a unit, so you want to make everybody happy at your own expense often. So like for me, I had an hour commute each way for my new grad job. It was like an hour and a half if I was coming back from night shift. So then I wasn't getting home until about like 9:30. And then if I had to leave by 5, that wasn't like enough time to get a whole like 7 or 8 hours of sleep in. So if you have any control over your schedule at all as a new grad, like try to limit the amount of flip-flopping that you're doing in a week. Yeah. Like don't be working day, night, day, all in the same calendar week, because it's like that's not good for you.
If you can.
If possible. Because I know on orientation it's like limited by your preceptors and like what availability they have, like all that stuff. But like the first boundary I think is like don't let a charge nurse bully you into picking up overtime or into switching out all of your shifts because you're new and you want to keep other people happy.
Right.
Because that is at your own detriment, right? Like you're hurting yourself to try to make other people happy. And if it's switching a Tuesday for a Thursday day shift, like, okay, whatever.
Sure.
But
if it's not going to harm you.
They had this thing where, so at my staff job, speaking of like systemic exploitation of new grads, right? So we were 40 hours a week, salaried, averaged over 6 weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So, but 50-50 day-night shift split every other weekend. So, and then I had a lot of 8-hour days when I was as a new grad doing like classes and stuff. I was there all the time, like 4 or 5 days a week as a new grad. And then you didn't get overtime unless you worked more than 40 hours a week, averaged over 6 weeks. So they could have you work.
So you could be in a 50-hour work week or more.
You could work 60 hours a week and not get any overtime.
Oh, that's horrible.
As a new grad who's not sleeping and is anxious and doesn't know what a heparin drip is. It was awful.
That's insane.
And that wasn't even my main point. They didn't have a union, by the way. They spent millions of dollars busting a unionization effort at the time. That's for a separate time. But my main point with this is that they had the charge nurses get in the habit of balancing the books. They never wanted anybody to pick up overtime, so they would have their schedule. And then they would see that they were 2 nurses short on Friday. So they would target the new grads and be like, hey, I need for you to switch from Tuesday day shift into Friday night shift.
So cheap.
And they didn't want to pay somebody overtime to come in and just pick up the days that they were scheduled. They wanted the new grads to fill all of their own deficiencies in the staffing.
No wonder they had so much turnover. And by the way, that's a huge safety issue for you as a new grad nurse. If you're picking up on like short shifts consistently, that means there's going to be less help for you when stuff goes down.
Yeah.
Especially if it's all new grads on that shift. Like if it's a Friday night and half of you are new grads, or like Who's going to save you?
Blind leading the blind. Like,
blind leading the blind.
You can literally have a whole half of the unit that's all new grads, or who all got off orientation at the same time.
That happened to me. One of my last shifts as a ICU nurse, I remember being the most senior person in my pod on night shift, and my patients were really sick that night. Not just my patients, like everyone in my pod was like, we're just gonna put it out there. I guess this is gonna be like a rated E podcast, where everyone was shitting the bed at the same time. All right, and like and I'm the resource, and I'm like, I've been here for like 19 months. Like, what's going on?
And you're the resource for other people for like when things go down. You're the resource. You've been there for like a year and a half. So.
Why do I know the most out of everyone right now?
During COVID, the first wave of COVID, right? So people in my cohort we were nurses for like 8 months when COVID happened. And when COVID happened, we still have this like need to please. This is kind of an aside. This is a story about how I didn't have boundaries. And then they were like, we want for you guys to like volunteer to pick up overtime in the COVID units. And I was like, I can help save America. Then COVID was,
serving her country.
Man, it was awful. Like, I was picking up overtime on these COVID units, and then they pulled us back because we had so many patients on ECMO with COVID. Like, we had, I think, like 8 circuits or something like that. And at Maryland, they had 20. But it was like, we had so many ECMO circuits. There was this one moment where they blocked off a whole row for ECMO. And then I looked down the unit, and it was like a Tuesday night or something. It was all of us new grads who had been there for like 9, 10, 11 months. There was no senior nurse. The charge nurse was on the clean side, so she was outside of the COVID area. So it was just 4 COVID circuits, 4 new grads.
Okay, so keep in mind, guys, for anyone who's not an HV, ICU, CT, SICU type person, back in the day, like pre-COVID era, like
PC.
It was PC. It was not normal for new grads to really learn ECMO ever. Like, it happened on this unit because they were chronically short-staffed, but that is not normal around the country before like recent years. Like, that is like a very high level of care, especially if it's nurse-driven ECMO, and like the nurses are taking on a lot of the ECMO circuit responsibilities.
Yeah, the perfusionists didn't want to come, so we were like, I was changing the sweep and like
that's not normal for a new grad to
oxygenator,
do. It's not normal. That's not good, because like that is a very high level of care. Like, I remember on my unit, you'd have to be a nurse for like close to 4 to 5 years before you would be allowed to take the ECMO class. So that's back in 2013, right? So like that is like what the nursing baseline should be.
Yeah.
And then like here's where we ended up, and that's because of, again, like lack of boundaries, like people just being totally exploited by the hospitals, not standing up for themselves, like collectively, and then this is where it led to.
So that unit had there was a staff of like 90 for 18 CVICU beds, and we had maybe 15 nurses who had been there longer than 5 years out of that. So the average length of time a nurse would stay was like 2 years or so, maybe some less. Some people would get there a year and leave. Some people would do 3. But the staffing turnover was so high that it was really difficult to even you had to walk half of the unit to find somebody who was like a resource you could ask a question to. Because if your next 4 or 5 neighbors, they all started when you did, so they're not going to know the question that you have, but they answer it.
Right.
So, and that kind of gets into you want to, I think we can talk about the way that hospitals exploit people. So hospitals.
We're going there.
Yeah, all right. Well,
we're diving in. All right.
My favorite.
We won't go too deep. We'll take it easy.
Claire's keep it abridged. All right.
I'm buckling up.
Yeah, TLDR here. But the hospital systems in America, they're built off of a for-profit model. And in the United States,
even the not-for-profit ones.
Yeah, they're built off of profit.
Are still profiting.
There's no monetary incentive for hospitals to keep nurses. If you have a nurse who's been there for 25 years and you have to pay them $65 an hour, you get a nurse for 50% off if you have a new grad. So if you pay a new grad $28 an hour versus a senior nurse $70 an hour, hospitals don't want to keep senior nurses.
Right.
So they're incentivized to have new grads, treat them so poorly that they burn out, and then get new grads 2 years later. And I think as a new nurse, I didn't have that kind of big perspective. I was like, why don't they want to keep their nurses? They need people to teach other people, and that was never their plan.
Yeah.
So then coming from the East Coast, where there was no senior nurses, there was maybe 15 senior nurses in a unit of 90 or 100 staff nurses. Then I got to California, where they have unions, and I was the youngest nurse by 15 years.
Amazing.
All of these nurses have been there for 10, 20, 30 years. They have pensions. They get 3 breaks a shift. They're really, and they also take care of each other. They take care of their new grads. They take care of their younger nurses. They have all this wealth of knowledge that was just like totally not there.
What a gift, right?
Yeah,
what
right?
a gift to like be like, and a privilege to work with people like that who can just like pour their knowledge onto you. That's amazing.
And they like loved, and they were so welcoming and like loving of me as a traveler, as like a little baby. They were like, oh, you're a little baby. And I'm like, I'm a big girl. I've been a nurse for like 2 years. They're like, you're an infant. Like, come here. And it was really cool to feel supported in those environments too.
Well, they're not burned out, right? And that's the thing about like, so, you know, unions have very varying levels of effectiveness based on how engaged the workers are with the 100%. Union, how like, you know, if the representatives aren't doing a good job, like, do they actually vote them out? Like, are people actually going to the meetings? Like, the union is only as strong as the people who make it up.
Yep.
But
it's a tool. How are you using the tool? The union is a tool. So if you're not using it, it's not working.
Right. So like in California, because like unions are so common, like there is just like a lot of collective strength, and they just created this culture like in mass, like across the state. But you know, if you are like the lone hospital with a union and like on like an island of hospitals with like no unions in your area,
HCA, and none of that, they all pay $26 an hour. And that concept of like union density matters a lot. So if you are a union hospital working in an area that has a lot of union hospitals, they make the working conditions everywhere higher, which is why they have to pay nurses like $100 an hour in California. Ooh. Because the whole area surrounding are all other unions, and then that makes them pay. So East Coast to West Coast, like the difference is the unions, and then again, but then like as a new grad nurse, let's say that you're not lucky enough to be working at a union hospital as a new grad, because you're probably not. What can you do like to try to mitigate the amount of harm? Don't sign up for shift switches without, like, that's not good for you. Don't work overtime as a new grad, because it's like, at least give yourself 6 months, I feel like, before you're working overtime. Like, let yourself learn. I don't know. What do you think?
So 6 months after orientation, I don't think including orientation, because you are seriously taking in so much and getting your feet wet. And if you take on the overtime too soon, like, I know you want the money, I know you want it so bad, and I know that you're being pressured, but like, you're going to be more likely, like, you're in that anxiety phase still. Like, you're not sleeping good still. You're probably nauseous before you go into work still. So, like, until the light bulb clicks and the anxiety's down and you're comfortable in your work environment, that's the time to go. And that usually takes a full 6 months after orientation, if not a year. So, like, really protect yourself that first year of being a nurse as much as you possibly can. And
it's literally not about you. Like, you are an amazing nurse. You're a new grad. And I felt like this massive need as like a 6-month nurse, an 8-month nurse, a year nurse. I was like, I can do it all. Why don't they give it to me? And it's like, you know, it's like you can be a really strong critical care nurse. You can have like great inquisitive mindset. You can handle anything that they give your way. And you still shouldn't be working 60 hours of overtime when you've been a nurse for 8 months, because it's going to accelerate your, like, you're not doing self-care. You're not having these other boundaries. So just like, don't work overtime as a new grad.
You're also going to get fatigued and miss stuff. And like when things aren't second nature to you, when they're not muscle memory to you yet, when you don't know, there's, you know, this phrase in medicine, like, you don't know what you don't know. And and then that gets mixed in with like the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is, you know, when you like are in the beginning stages of like not knowing much, you're like, I don't know anything. And then like you get a certain level of knowledge and you think you know so much more than you do. Like, ooh, like your confidence in your knowledge goes way up like this. And then you become like more of a real expert, and you're like, oh my God, I actually don't know anything at all. So like, I think a lot of people who are in that, like, all of a sudden they get that confidence boost. They're like, I can work 60 hours a week. I can take that patient. And like, ooh, there's still a lot of things that you might be missing. And if you're fatigued physically and like burning out and like just putting out a ton of fires, like, you're going to miss stuff, you're going to get burned, like at work, and then you're going to burn out at home.
All of the mistakes that I made as a new grad nurse were when I was on my 3rd or 4th or 5th night shift consecutively.
Should never be working more than 3 nights in a row, ever.
And I was fatigued and I hadn't slept enough. So every single patient mistake that could have caused harm, fortunately they didn't, but I did make some medication errors as a new grad. And it was because I was fatigued and I was on my 4th night shift of the week, and I was tired, and that, like, it's not benign. It can cause a lot of harm, which then kind of, I feel like, transitions into boundaries in how you allow other people to speak to you.
I love this conversation.
Chris is good at this. I love it because, like, I grew up in the South where people are, like, nice, and then they're, like, mean behind your back, and I don't like that. But then I went to Colorado, and people are, like, pretty direct, and then I went to Baltimore where people are very, like, very direct, and that was like a big adjustment. But sometimes people were direct in a way that was actually like bullying and like not okay.
Yeah.
So like
abrasive. That's not nice. You don't need to be not nice.
Right.
You can be nice.
And I think that
gentle but firm.
You also, I think as a new grad, do have to set up some boundaries in the way that people speak to you, both like your patients and other nurses and like providers. So
okay, let's start with talking with other staff members and setting boundaries with them first, because I think that's what you're going to come across more often than patients, truthfully. And
I feel like that's what's going to feel
it's the harder one.
Yeah,
it's the scarier one.
Yeah.
I'm still scared of some people. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm way over that. They traumatized me now.
Oh, I was so scared of some of the like senior ICU nurses when I was a new grad.
I was scared back then. I was scared of everyone.
There was like a few known like bullies, and oh my gosh, they like stressed me out so much. There was one nurse who would just sit there and ignore you while you gave report, and then make little like condescending remarks sometimes.
Oh, I had like there were so many people like that. It was awful.
I was like, and so then you're a new grad and you're like holding your report sheet. You're like, patient Bob Jones is a 58-year-old male, history of hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and then they're just like sitting there like looking at you and like judging you, and you like, it was a lot. But I don't know. Okay, so like let's say, okay, I want to give you a scenario that like you come across some staff nurses who are like bullying one of the people in your cohort that you started with. Like and it's not about you, but they're like talking smack about somebody who's like not even doing anything bad. They're just being like condescending and mean towards someone that you know, but you're also a new grad. Like
so do you speak up for them, or do you just stay silent?
That's hard.
I mean, you don't want to like have a shots fired moment at yourself either, but at the same time, like, I mean, I think it's fair to, when I hear people speak poorly of other people, I pretty much always stand up for people. I think I might have been scared to as a brand new grad.
That's hard.
But now, I mean, I don't like go out of my way to correct people and like in a way that's going to embarrass them, but I'll be like, honestly, like, hey, like,
I think they're doing a good job.
They're doing the best they can here. Like, and you know what? I totally get where that person's coming from, and they didn't know this, and now they know, okay? And then usually people are like, yeah, you're right.
Right. It kind of diffuses the situation.
Like a little gentle prod.
Yeah, I feel like that usually diffuses the situation. And then like, I think sometimes it's easier when it's other people and it's not you. Like you don't necessarily...
It's easier to stand up for someone than yourself.
A lot of times you don't want to stand up for yourself, but you'll stand up for other people.
Yeah.
Which is like, ties into like a lot of the other points we have about like being nice to yourself. But I can think of... I'm going to tell a little story. Okay, so like I was a new grad and I was admitting this like fresh open heart case. I think I've told this story before.
Oh, that's a good story.
Yeah, and then we get to the point where everybody stands in the room and then you like say your name and like what you're doing. You're like, I'm Anna, I'm the bedside nurse, I'm the admitting nurse. And then Chrissy would be like, I'm Chrissy, I'm the CRNA, like from admitting this patient. And then after we all went around and like named our names, the attending physician was like, Anna, what are your pacemaker thresholds? And I'm like testing the pacemaker thresholds, so I'm like checking my pumps and all of this stuff, and I'm not getting capture because it's not working. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm not getting capture. And then he looks at me and then he's like, gentlemen, what did we learn? We learned that Anna doesn't know how to test a pacemaker. Like in front of like 15 people. Totally not appropriate or like constructive at all.
Not appropriate.
So like what did I do in that moment? I was a new grad and I didn't say anything, and it really bothered me. And I wish that I had said like something in that moment, because we ended up having to place a skin lead. Like I was correct. Like he was wrong. But it was like I didn't have a boundary and I didn't stand up for myself. I
think it's again hard in a moment like that when someone's just like all out making fun of you. Again, like my go-to is to kind of just like diffuse with like a joke, like or something like that, or be like no, or to actually really in that moment, because it's a patient safety concern that it's not capturing. I think what I actually would do today is say
to another nurse is like, oh, would you check it? Like, could you check it?
No, I would actually not do that. I would say to them directly, like, actually, I'm concerned. If whenever you say the word concerned,
it should be like
or the word safety, it's like a red flag that makes people stop and say, you know, Dr. So-and-so, I'm concerned because this pacer truly is not capturing. Here, take a look at it yourself. That's how I would address it today in this moment in time if that happened to me.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also like, I share that story so that new grads know it's like, I like wasn't brave as a new grad. I didn't have a strong sense of like boundaries for like self-respect either. So I think that there's a lot that you can do differently to not just kind of like keel over and sit there. But I don't know.
So
it's hard.
My like main way that I like to think of breaking down these difficult conversations is understand the intention. Like understand like what's the point of the communication, what's the intention behind it, and what's the resolution. And if you can like give like a 3-point rebuttal, like I understand that we need to know the patient's pacemaker threshold.
Yeah.
I recognize that it appears that
it's not working.
Like, let's take a look at this pacemaker together and figure it out, right? Like,
yeah.
Or in the case of somebody like making fun of you for a knowledge deficit, like that's the more common thing you're gonna see, like, oh, you didn't know that, or like somebody shaming you, like you're supposed to do X, Y, Z. Like these are like kind of common conversations that come up. I understand that I'm supposed to know this. I recognize that you're just trying to teach me something. I recognize that you're worried about this, or I recognize that I should be worried about this. I will study and, not do that again in the future, or I will look up the policy in the future. Like, you give some sort of a resolution. Like, I know what you're saying. I understand the intention behind why you're saying it, and this is what I'm going to do about it.
That also puts somebody, even if they are sitting there being nasty, back in the position of, will you teach me? Like, and that puts them back from the place of, they probably weren't teaching in a very constructive way in that moment, but that kind of reframes it of like, hey,
you're teaching them how to be a teacher.
Teaching them how to be a teacher. You say, it's like, I understand where you're coming from, that this is a safety thing that I need to be aware of. I'm going to look back into this while we're here. Could you show me what you're talking about?
You really do teach people how to treat you, and that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of, and it's interesting because this kind of ties into like interview questions, because you're always going to have an interview question about like, tell us about a time that you like disagreed with the team, or that you had a disagreement with a coworker and how you kind of handled and like treated that. I think also oftentimes as women, we end up dealing oftentimes with like inappropriate comments at work too. Like, how do you deal with that?
That comes from patients a lot. So
that comes from patients too.
So how do you handle that with a patient is a really difficult thing.
I think it's easier with
I
think it's easier with patients than it is with coworkers. Coworkers is really annoying. Like, coworkers, I now like, the first way that I learned to stand up for myself was against men who were being inappropriate. Yeah. And so and like, be that from a coworker or from a patient. So really clear boundary settings. Like, so one time, I'll tell another story. I was at a new travel assignment, and somebody who I'd never met, he was another ICU nurse. He comes up and he's like, is that a hickey on your neck? First thing he's ever said to me, I've never met this man in my life. And I look at this guy and I was like, that was completely inappropriate.
I was going to say, that was inappropriate, or you're making me uncomfortable, or like really good stopgap things to kind of just put the kibosh on it.
So don't laugh it off. It's not funny. Like, a quick moment where you're like, I'm uncomfortable with that, or that was inappropriate. That was inappropriate works really well.
That's all you need to say. Just end it there.
Yeah, that was inappropriate.
Kibosh.
That's it. Patients, oftentimes, they'll have inappropriate comments. They may even have inappropriate comments in the way, like, I've had coworkers of mine who have patients who are very, like, derogatory towards them for their, religion or their race or any of this other stuff. Like, none of that's appropriate either. With patients, you can have like a really clear cut boundary where you're like, hey, all I'm trying to do is help you get better. I'm going to come back in the room and you can speak to me with respect.
I think that's a really fair thing to say.
Yeah. And that goes for family members who are yelling, like all of that stuff. You say, we're trying to heal your family member. I will come back when we can have a respectful conversation. Like, I
think that's a really fair boundary.
And you remove yourself from...
And you're not casting blame. It's just like... It's just a behavioral expectation.
It's like, I'm not going to be yelled at. Yeah. Like that. And I think that every ICU nurse is going to have a situation where people are, they're having one of the worst days of their life, but that doesn't mean that they can scream at you.
I will say a lot of the times too, when people are violating your boundaries or like attacking you in some way, a lot of times it's like they just want to feel hurt. So just the other day, this happened to me. I was helping transport a patient to the ICU. I was just an extra set of hands, and a transport ventilator was left behind in the operating room, and we actually had looked for it. We had a discussion. We're like, didn't respiratory leave behind the transport ventilator? And we were looking for it, and we never found it. And so we're like, that's weird. You know what? Somebody must have come by and picked it up. Maybe it was in the hall and we didn't realize. Let's find out when we get up there. That was the conversation. We're like, and if not, we'll circle back. We had a whole discussion. It was a great plan, right?
Yeah.
This respiratory therapist comes barreling down the hall, screaming at the top of his lungs at us, like, you knew that you left it! And
you're like, whoa!
And he's like lashing out. And so I'm just shocked at how this is going down. Like, I just couldn't believe someone was speaking to us like that in front of patients and family members, like at a really loud voice from a distance. And
full throat screaming.
So it was actually really funny because the surgeon had come up with us and he's like trying to like talk him down, and the respiratory therapist is getting more and more mad.
Like,
and he's like, they know! And he's turning purple, and I was like, this is wild. So I step out in the hallway. And by the way, so like, again, it's so much easier to stand up for other people. Mm-hmm. So really, like, I was standing up for the anesthesia resident who was with me because I was helping him. It was his patient, right? So the respiratory was kind of like mostly directing it towards him. So I step out into the hallway and I'm like, we're not going to shout right now. I said, we're not going to do this. Where exactly do you remember leaving the ventilator? I will go look for it myself. And he's like, he's like, it was on the floor by the computer where you chart. And I said, okay. I said, let's go. We didn't see it in the room. We did have a conversation about it. We were wondering if maybe someone took it after all and we were mistaken. I will go down right now and bring it back up. And he was just like, oh, thank you. And kind of just like walked, like he just like scuttled away, like with embarrassment. And like,
you should be embarrassed.
Sometimes you just have to like stop like the action and like you just have to be the bigger person and like I took accountability for us missing the transport ventilator. Like, we tried, like, yeah, we forgot, we didn't bring it up when we were supposed to, but also we didn't know where it was. Like, we were planning on having a polite conversation about it. Like, so, you know, sometimes you just have to take accountability and like, and just teach people how to speak.
Yeah, using your words like an adult. Another good line is, there's no need to yell. Like,
there's no need to, that's probably the more professional way to say it. We're not going to do this.
Yeah, there's no need to yell. That works too. But like, you know, some people... coworkers will
there's no need to yell.
Inappropriate sometimes, and like sometimes if they're just like berating you, taking a beat to let like the silence hit them for a second.
Yeah,
and then
silence is a good tool.
So like a silence and then a pause and then there's no need to yell usually works really well. That's like a good one.
Clutch. That's
to like de-escalate. I like what you were saying with the RT about you explaining what you had done, that you had done some steps, because unfortunately I've worked with some irate surgeons who come in like angry that their patient's decompensating, and it's like, dude, it's not my fault. You left them with a surgical bleed. I don't know what to tell you.
A lot of times, like, you tell them what you did, like show that you're taking accountability for the situation.
Use your thought process that you're not just sitting there letting something happen. So then you're like, hey, I did these things. There's no need to yell. Here's where we are. Then you can kind of catch them up to like your speed with what you're thinking. Like, does that excuse the way that they communicated with you? No, but sometimes tensions are high and they only slept an hour and a half in the last 2 days or whatever. But still, like, communicate, use your words, communicate what you did with the patient, communicate what's going on. There's no need to yell is a good line. That's a good one. Also, I did this one time where I was at one of my last travel assignments in, I'm not going to name the name, but I was at a travel assignment, and then the anesthesiologist and the surgeon wanted me to consent a patient who was nonverbal and who had altered mental status for a surgery. And I was like, I'm the nurse. And they were like, well,
it's all completely inappropriate.
They're like, our nurses do our consents for us. I'm like, they shouldn't.
They shouldn't be.
Like, that.
Where did they come up with that?
It was one of these like private, you know, like private hospitals where
it's like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Literally, like the doctors had like the longest leash and all the nurses just like did whatever they wanted or whatever. Anyway, I'm like, well, I'm not the one. I didn't say that. But they were like, oh, well, why isn't this patient in the OR? I'm like, because you didn't do the consent. And then I called ahead of time to the anesthesiologist so that he could come consent. He's like, oh, we'll just do it when I get up there. I was like, okay. So I had the paper waiting for him. And then he gets up there and he's like, why isn't this filled out? And I was like, because the patient's nonverbal and I'm not the one to consent. Like, I still got 3 years of school before I'm allowed to do that, dude. And then he starts yelling. The surgeon comes up from the OR and starts yelling. They both are yelling at each other and me and then the patient. And then with the OR nurse, no, the like PACU, whoever, pre-op nurses.
Pre-op.
Yeah, they're like yelling. And then I say, there's no need to yell. And then I leave. I just leave the room.
I love that. Sometimes you just need to put a break in a moment, a pause.
They keep yelling at the pre-op nurses in the room with the patient who's nonverbal in the bed. They're still yelling for like 5 minutes. And then I go back in there with a little piece of paper and I'm looking at these guys and I was like, what are both of your last names? I was like, I'm 100% writing you guys up.
That's the thing. At the end of the day, sometimes people do need to be written up. And like, it's not because you're trying to be petty, but you're protecting future patients, you're protecting other coworkers. Like if I see staff,
it's a safety issue. Like,
it's a safety issue. Yeah, if I see staff being really abusive to learners, I report them anonymously in our system. Now that's very few and far between at my institution. We actually have a really good culture.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome there, actually. I would say pretty brag-worthy, but every now and then you see stuff over the years, and I do not hesitate to boop, 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 boop. This person was abusing their resident. This person spoke to their med student.
As a traveler, to me at the time as a travel nurse, my job is to advocate for my patients and to do my job. As a traveler, you're kind of removed from the workplace politics, and I will 100% report somebody who's being inappropriate to a patient, to a staff member, to a nurse. Like, absolutely. Because the thing is like, especially with providers, they make the hospitals a lot of money. So if you don't leave a paper trail, nothing's going to happen. Right. They're never going to have a meeting that's like disciplinary. They're never going to talk to this guy. So it's important that you file that paper trail. And if somebody's really yelling and it's really inappropriate, I recommend just leaving the room. Like, I won't be spoken to like that.
You can walk away. I mean, that's how you create a culture of safety. Now, unfortunately, in anesthesia, you can't leave the room. That's patient abandonment.
Right. Ooh. Yeah. You can't leave
but learning how to speak up for yourself is really important, and just learning how to calm, unsteady waters is a really good thing to do. And never direct it at the person. Say, like, don't use you statements. Like, you shouldn't do this, right? That sets people off more.
You can say, I won't be spoken to that way.
I won't be spoken to that way. Absolutely.
Because then that makes it's not an attack.
It's your boundary.
It's a pause.
Your boundary.
It's not about your behavior. It's about
my boundary.
My boundary. So that's a good way to do it.
I agree.
There's no need to yell is one. I won't be spoken to that way is one I use a lot.
That's inappropriate.
That's inappropriate is one that is good, especially for the inappropriate content.
Understand, recognize, intervention.
Yep.
The sandwich. The communication sandwich.
You need to have boundaries as a new grad, and you deserve just as much respect as a 22-year-old new grad as you do as like a 35-year-old staff nurse.
Absolutely.
You do not need to be putting up with being yelled at. Completely inappropriate.
So what about boundaries outside of work? Like, how do you have boundaries in your personal life? We talked about the schedule. We talked about like not getting taken advantage of with shifts. We talked about obviously like communication in the workplace between patients and coworkers. Yeah. But what about like with your life at home? Like, what about boundaries there?
So I think learning to like speak up for your needs is really large and huge. So this ties into communication as a new grad. So like, you can't do everything yourself, and you need to learn how to communicate what you need help with. So, and then that translates to your home life. So let's say that you just work a night shift. Let's say that you have a partner, maybe kids, maybe pets. I don't really know what's going on at your home life, but you haven't slept much the last 3 days, and you guys are out of food, and like there's an errand that needs to be run. It's okay to ask for help and say like, hey, partner, mom, dad, spouse, whoever, I am not gonna be able to go to the grocery store today. I haven't slept. Can you pick up food?
Outsource, delegate, if you have the financial means, which as a nurse, I'm assuming that in theory, sometimes you'd be able to do this. Order your groceries off Instacart just that one time if you need to give yourself a break. I know it's more expensive. I know it's a waste of money. If you're really that tired though, set up that self-care boundary. And my mom always says this phrase, she's a mental health counselor. She's like, you have to express your wants and needs appropriately. And like, it is such a true statement. Expressing your wants and needs appropriately is the core of human communication. Yep. And that's how people know how to interact with you and help meet your needs. People are not mind readers. Unfortunately, if they were, the world would probably be a much better place. We'd realize that we're all much more similar than we think.
I've recently realized that I try to read other people's minds as a trauma response from my own life and trying to constantly keep other people happy.
Yeah.
Other people are not mind readers, and it's not normal to try to sense the emotional mood of somebody.
Yeah, just because you might be doing that, I also do that, doesn't mean everyone else is doing that.
So communicate. You. Yeah, it'd be like, hey, I'm tired. I don't want to go hang out with people tonight. Or, hey, I am going to go do my dance class. I'm going to go do my I'm going to go take a class with people. And I need to use that time for me. So I think also something my therapist has said, be in therapy. That's very good to do, is to have look at your day and schedule things around the pillars of it. If you can't sleep at least 7 hours, you can't do it. If you're not going to eat 3 meals, you can't do it. And then also learn how to give boundaries with other people who want things from you.
Yeah.
Because nurses often are givers, and you want to help not only your patients, but also whatever organizations you're involved in. they like want you to be a leader, that want you to be involved in all these groups and stuff, and it's like learn to say no to things that are gonna do nothing but make you like frustrated at the end of the day and stressed out. So like make sure you're eating, sleeping. Like sounds basic, we say this all the time, but like eat, sleep, build those boundaries.
Yeah, and then again, like how you utilize your time on your day off. Like I really never like didn't know this until recently, but like scheduling ahead time blocks for your walk, for your exercise, for whatever, or limits on social media is another great example.
Yeah.
Like a lot of us post night shift would just crash on the couch and binge watch Netflix, crash on the couch and scroll mindlessly. And you can just do that for hours. You don't even realize it. And then like you haven't really rested and recharged the way you think you do.
You're actually more drained because, you know, the world, especially, it's not good out there. And so like, let's say that you just worked a shift in the ICU where you had a patient die and then you come home and you're scrolling on
nurse talk
and you're seeing all of
nursing's terrible. The world is terrible.
And, you know, we've got a new pandemic and we're losing our rights. Like, yes, be aware, but like boundaries so that you're not just sitting in the knowledge of like how horrible everything is.
You need breaks to like come up for air.
And then you're just grieving and you're not like, you're not taking care of yourself.
I think about like soldiers like in war and how like they like take breaks to like think of like old war movies, right? Like I'm thinking like World War II, right?
They played soccer.
Right? They're taking breaks to like play cards, like play games, like talk, laugh, like go out in town. Like it's not all doomed 24/7 because you have to rest and recharge and like heal before you go in for your next round.
And the thing is, you're one person. Like you can't work 48 hours in the ICU, 36 hours in the ICU. Learn what an inotrope is, take care of your patients, keep up with your mom, take care of your cats, and fix all of the problems in the world while you're not sleeping. Like, take care of yourself. Be nice to yourself.
Yeah, I'd like set just like time limits on your phone. There's different like the iPhone has built in like
screen
like
time.
social media screen time like tracking or limits. There's apps that you can do to limit, or you just set an alarm, just the old-fashioned way. Just saying, you know what, I'm not going to scroll for more than an hour.
So something that I only started doing in the last year, because I did work night shifts in the past year, and then before that I was like rotating a lot, is to plan your next day or your day off or your flip day before it happens.
Yeah.
So that especially if you're doing a night shift and you come home and you're on your flip and you just are on the couch glued to it, it does make it a lot better if the night before, like right before you lay down, you make out your list on whatever planning app you use. And then you're like, okay, I'm gonna sleep for 4 hours. And then very simple things, but set yourself little goals and plan out what you need to get done on your day. And then you're not gonna just stay there.
Yeah.
Like, so, and I do this now, like if I don't plan my next couple of days, like the night before, and I don't review it, then I wake up and then all of a sudden it's noon and I've missed out on a lot of time. So like plan your time before, and then post night shift, like take a shower, go get your nails done, and go on a small walk. It doesn't have to be going to like CrossFit. It doesn't have to be like running a half marathon, but like shower, getting some food and coffee, get up and move around a little bit so you're not like one with the couch. You'll feel a lot better.
Small attainable goals. Don't overpack those days off either. You know, keep it chill.
But keep it light.
I think that's like that.
I feel like that's a lot of...
We covered all the boundaries that you have to let.
Boundaries versus, you know, capitalists, corporations. I want to milk every penny out of you. Boundaries with your coworkers. Boundaries with yourself.
Boundaries with yourself. Boundaries with social media.
Comment what you would like us to talk about next, because I really am enjoying these kind of more like... It's not lighthearted, but it's not like clinical.
It's conversational, and it's important because these are things that like I think don't get addressed a lot or talked about in depth, and they're really important conversations to have because I think it's stuff that most of us struggle with, most of us can relate to on some level. And if you come away with like one small tidbit that makes your life better, I think that's really worth our time.
It's really valuable. So please comment what you would like us to talk about. I'm really enjoying these kind of like series where we're talking about like the human side of nursing. I like that. Like it's not, we're talking about, you know, ARDS and vent settings and the membership, but I like this like human side of nursing too. So
me too. Take care of yourselves, guys.